Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. My next guest has written an article that we have posted at pointofview.net, and this is what it reads. Everything is different now. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed how we interact, how we conduct business, and how we recreate. Public education will also have to change. We have an opportunity now to ensure that it changes for the better, that Texas school kids can learn in the way that suits them best, whether it's in a traditional classroom or online, or even through an innovative apprenticeship. We can give families more choices. With me to discuss this is Erin Valdez. She is with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. She is a policy analyst for Next Generation Texas. And before joining TPPF, she was with the Charles Cook Foundation. And even before that, she was a teacher. She taught for over a decade in Austin area schools and was an assistant principal at a charter school in Louisville. And then she was also, she got her degree at Hillsdale College and a master's degree at UC Santa Barbara out in California, where all the fires are. And she was homeschooled. I think that's an important part of this. Erin, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. And, this is an interesting opportunity. I mean, right now we are seeing some Texas schools opening for in-person learning. Many schools are not opening. And but it's important that we get the schools open, isn't it?
I think it is. And the reason is because students need to be in the place where they learn best. And so parents generally know that better than anybody else, obviously. And so some students are going to thrive in a homeschool setting. I mean, I was certainly one of those students. And we want parents to have that freedom. But there are other students who thrive by being in more of a structured classroom setting. And not only that, in many cases, parents are really trying to make ends meet right now. I mean, it's not only a health crisis, but an economic crisis. And so with children having to learn remotely, what that often means is for some families, they're going to lose at least one income because one parent is going to have to stay at home to monitor that remote learning when that wasn't exactly part of their plan. And so especially in a time of economic downturn, it's causing even more hardship on families in some cases.
I know that in Texas, during the initial lockdowns, Texas sort of loosened up the online learning in the state. And, I look at online learning for little kids. When you think about little elementary school kids, it just seems impossible to me to have much of that during the day. But that was what happened. Do you have any observations of how that worked and how it's set up to work this fall?
So anecdotally, I think it's not worked fantastically well for younger students across the board. Mostly because younger students, especially those under third grade, say, I mean, it's just very difficult. I mean, we talk about the need for students to have a variety of different learning contexts. Students under that age, just developmentally, it's going to be hard for them to sit still and to pay attention to lessons that are happening online. So I think that part probably has not been a universal success. On the other hand, there are students who do thrive from those kinds of things, especially if they're in a supervised setting, where they have a parent or a teacher or a guide there to help them do a short online lesson, then apply it, and then maybe do something else. So I think the issue is more the volume and the over-reliance on that as the total form of education for those younger kids. On the other hand, we don't have any problem with families who choose that mode if that is best for them. I think our biggest issue is picking one mode and then saying everybody has to do that without taking into account each individual child's needs or gifts.
Yeah, so that's where sometimes I think this whole COVID is a problem for education is also possibly going to spawn some solutions. One of those has been so innovative because parents have said, I want my kid in school, and I can't. There's no school for my child. I have maybe some means that I could make that happen. So these learning pods have sprung up. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Learning pods are something that's actually been going on for a long time. As a former homeschooled student, I can tell you that we used to call them co-ops back in my homeschooling days. And basically what they were was 2 or 3 times a week, or maybe even once a week, you got together with other families, usually not very many families, and you'd have a dad or a mom with a special skill in a subject, whether that was Spanish or woodworking. Those are the two that stand out in my life, who would teach a lesson to the students, and then they might give them a little project to do at home and bring back the next week. So whether that was, here's how to build a bird house, why don't you go home and finish it at home and bring it back, or learning some Spanish, things of that nature. So it was very informal. What's interesting is that's become more and more formalized. So even before COVID, parents were getting together into micro schools. So that's another term that's used for these. So there were these schools springing up in New York City through cottage schools, and then there was Prenda micro schools, which is a charter network, and then there were other sort of more informal networks like Classical Conversations. So these micro schools were springing up before COVID, and then COVID hit. And then all of a sudden, sort of spontaneously, a lot of parents either reinvented that or discovered these. And so basically what a pod is when families join together voluntarily. They either hire a teacher or they find a tutor, or a parent takes on, a certain number of instructional responsibilities. And it's in-person education, often supplemented by online education, which is really important. But it is in a social setting, which is key for student development in many cases. And so that's what makes learning pods sort of, I think, it's almost a back-to-the-future approach. The one-room schoolhouse meets the 21st century. And a friend of mine, Matthew Ladner, has written really extensively on the subject if listeners are interested in learning more about it.
Well, that's great. And, I just love the idea. Some of the most innovative things were some parent in another state built a little pod in the backyard, and then they had an Airstream, which was sort of the school office. And awesome. 6 kids were in there every day, all day, and they paid a teacher to take care of that, and the parents could even go to work. So, that's a really big one. But, all of this takes money, doesn't it, Erin?
Yeah, it does. And it's actually, as soon as these started springing up and becoming an option for families, you saw immediately the concern being raised that there's an equity issue here. I mean, this is possible for families who have a little bit of disposable income that can kick in some money for the teacher, and they can make that work for them. However, there are millions of families, and in fact, the majority of students enrolled in public schools probably, income-wise, don't fall into that category. And so this is an equity issue. The interesting thing is that, our foundation, along with a lot of other foundations for a long time, has been promoting the idea of, the idea that the funding should follow the student.
Yes.
And so we put a lot of money into public education, and the idea is, it goes to the institutions right now. And now our perspective is, why shouldn't the money follow the student? So if a family chooses a learning pod, then the funding that would be going to their public school should follow them to that learning pod to help them cover those expenses. So there actually is a model here that's it's taken root in some places. In Florida, they have the Gardner scholarships. Arizona has an education savings account model. These things exist, but they've faced a lot of an uphill climb up to this point.
Yeah.
I think COVID is throwing a spotlight on how necessary something like this would be.
That is the silver lining, something to think about. Finally, school choice having its moment. We'll be back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, in the past, both Republican and Democratic candidates have talked about abortion. Sometimes Republicans might avoid the topic, but rarely did Democrats. The assumption a few decades ago was that pro-choice was a winning theme, while being pro-life sometimes was a liability. The two national political conventions reversed the perspective on abortion. The topic was never mentioned in the Democratic National Convention. Abortion and pro-life comments surfaced many times in the Republican National Convention. The convention even featured a lengthy speech by Abby Johnson, who is a former Planned Parenthood clinic director and now a pro-life activist who founded the group And Then There Were None. In her speech, she talked rather graphically about abortion because she recognized that most Americans, she said, can't even conceive of the barbarity. In abortion clinics, they have to piece together the remains of babies. She even talked about the smell of abortion and asked, "Did you even know that abortion has a smell?" Her speech went a long way in educating the American public. Now, the silence about abortion at the Democratic Convention may have something to do with recent polls. The current view expressed by Democratic leaders is that abortion must be legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. Americans do not support such a view. While millions of Americans may believe that abortion should be legal, you only can find about 13% of Americans who support abortion through all 9 months. The Democratic platform and most leading Democratic leaders also call for taxpayer support of abortion. This isn't a popular view with most Americans. Nearly 80% oppose taxpayer-funded abortion, including about 3/4 of Democrats. All of this suggests that it will be the Republican candidates more than the Democratic candidates who will be talking about abortion this election season. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Erin Valdez, and she is with Next Generation Texas, part of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We so admire the work of TPPF and have had many of their experts on Point of View on various issues. But I think for me, from my heart, Erin, education is really top of the list. I homeschooled my children in the early years. And, back then it was difficult. In California, you had to basically register as a private school. Things are much more open. People have seen how well homeschooled kids do. And all these other options are out there now, as some schools aren't even open and parents are looking for alternatives. So there's the whole idea of school choice that's now getting, it just makes so much sense that the money would follow the child. And especially if parents are out there, Erin, saying, hey, my school's not open and I'm paying my taxes. So, can you tell us about Texas? I mean, I know that there are success stories in other states, but what is happening here in this state?
One thing that we're seeing happening in Texas that's super encouraging is that parents are starting to realize that the power is in their hands. So while not all districts are open for full-time, in-person learning, the governor has certainly put his foot down about that. And schools are announcing plans to come back fully in person, and they're doing it at different rates and at different times. And frankly, they all have different plans, and it's kind of all over the map. But the good news is that I think the parents are realizing that their voices matter. And so before, I think sometimes people sort of assumed, well, the schools have got this, they're going to take care of it, they know best. And that's, an okay assumption in most people for most cases. except when you really start to drill down and understand, hey, there might be better options for me. And that's what's really the encouraging thing, is that parents are asking that question now. Even if the school does go back into session, is that school a school that they feel comfortable sending their student back to? In a lot of cases, parents are not pleased with some of the instructional things that are coming across their table now for the first time. And so in Texas, I think the key is that parents are realizing that the power's in their hands, that they're making their voices heard at the local district level, which is really where it matters in a lot of cases, and saying, hey, we want choices. We want our children to be able to go back safely in person. We want you to also offer virtual options that are robust and meaningful and quality options for our kids. So in a sense, it's just re-engaged parents in this conversation, which is the prerequisite to any kind of change.
Absolutely. When parents had to pay attention when school was at home for everybody online, they learned a lot. And Erin, I know that, the regular school model doesn't always work well for everybody, that you would go, to high school and then you go to college and then you go out and get a job. But sometimes certain people have certain interests where they could actually start much earlier and not perhaps follow the typical college route, or they still would, but they could also begin training for something earlier than most of us think. And I know that you've thought about that a lot.
This is actually my core area of interest in my research at the foundation, is high school apprenticeships and post-secondary options for students. So, as I think about it, and talking to my father who went through high school in the 70s in Florida, he tells me stories about his shop classes and how wonderful it was. It set him on his career path of becoming an HVAC repairman, which, if you say that to somebody now, they might say, well, that's not a very, high aspiration. But here's the thing. He took that skill, he built on that skill, and he ended up working for the corporate offices of Walmart, And so he rose through the ranks, kind of in the way that people, used to do, based on their merit and not based on the fact that he had a college degree, which is an inspiring story. And I think a lot of corporations, it's very funny, again, Back to the Future, are coming back and realizing they've over-relied on a college degree as a sort of a screening mechanism for who's qualified to work in certain jobs. Google is kind of going back and saying, let's do our own certifications. Let's just offer our own certificates for people to take and see if they like these kinds of jobs, if they're qualified. It's a key part of their recruitment strategy. We also see this happening in other industries. So, in advanced manufacturing and in construction, we talked to the CEO of the Texas Association of Builders the other day, and one of the things he brought out in that conversation with my boss Kevin Roberts was, hey, believe it or not, construction's booming right now. These jobs, they're abundant even in this economy. And currently, based on the research we've done, schools are actually kind of dismissing these more hands-on CTE programs and in favor of either legacy programs that have been at the school forever, or in favor of more college-focused vocational programs. Right. And so what we're calling on is saying to high schools, hey, look, you've got an opportunity to add more value to the instruction you're offering by giving students meaningful work-based learning opportunities, where they're not only learning, the stuff they need to know in class, but they're going out and applying that in the real world. And I'll tell you, that first job is the key to opportunity for most people. It's that first foot in the door where you learn those soft skills, where you learn about being accountable to yourself and to others around you. And that's what employers are really looking for. So, COVID's shaken up a lot of things. I think it's shaking up our job market. I think people are looking at things in a different way. And I think apprenticeships, again, Back to the Future, are going to be a key part of that reconfiguration.
Homeschooling, since its beginning of its explosion in the United States, a component of it was the cottage industry, where a family would actually figure out some kind of a business and train their child in that business to be a full participant, even, very young. And I always thought that it was so good, because it doesn't mean you're not going to go to college. It just means you are going to learn how to operate in the real world where you could survive and run a business. That's another part of it. But now I think, Erin, we look at colleges and, the huge amount of debt that kids are coming out with. The idea that presidential candidates are running on paying off everybody's student loan debt, and otherwise we taxpayers would be doing that. And the idea also that the colleges are struggling so now in the face of this pandemic. So I think these alternatives are very timely.
Colleges are struggling, and it's interesting, instead of kind of looking at, well, are we first of all, colleges may have overpromised in the past 30 years. They might have said, all students have to go to college, and by the way, we're the only path to prosperity.
Right.
So when you say that, it's very self-serving, right, on their part. So, and then all of a sudden they realize they can't actually deliver on that right now for all kinds of reasons. A lot of them aren't open in person. They're having all kinds of issues with enrollment and people deferring and gap years and all these things, and so they're facing a disruption of their own. I think you brought up a really important point about getting that firsthand experience in the real world. There's a book I recommend called The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. And it really does highlight how students have been, over the past 20, 30 years, put in this mindset of everything is academic, you must be on this path to going to college. And as a result, they don't have other experiences that aren't sort of resume focused, right? And this has led to a certain amount of fragility in their psyche. And I think you're seeing that now in a lot of the disruptions we're having in our society and the way people can't cope with one another and have real interpersonal interactions that are sort of what we would consider normal. I think it's coming out in some really interesting ways, and I think part of it is because students have been basically told you need to be in these very regimented programs, very overscheduled, and they're not given an opportunity to sort of experience life outside of their an adult supervision, essentially.
Well, this has been a good, I think, encouragement here, because sometimes I get very worried about the fear-based culture we've got right now as we open back up. I think Texas folks are braver than others sometimes, but sometimes I hear about what's going on in other states, and liberals will keep us fearful. So I think this is a way that Texas can be a great example. I'm so glad you're there, Erin, at Texas Public Policy Foundation, because I know you guys have outsized influence, much more than Texas. It goes to all the way to D.C. and throughout the country. The ideas that you put into place and that we then test in our laboratory of the state of Texas are important, I think, for everyone. Certainly not one size fits all, but sometimes you see what works and other states will pick it up. So the work you do is important, and I wanted to encourage you in that and also say thank you, and I hope that you will come back and join us again.
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much.
That's Erin Valdez, Texas Public Policy Foundation. And, I know that we're going to see permanent changes from COVID, and sometimes things looked really bad and have looked bad. And, of course, we're now seeing cases go down, and maybe we're coming now toward the beginning of the end of this pandemic. But we never want to waste a problem. And this one is not going to go to waste, because there are going to be some really good changes, I think, taking place in public education. If you want to talk about education, are your kids going back to school, give us a call, 800-351-1212. We'll continue on this topic after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
There is so much we can say about schools and school choice, especially right now. It's the fall. We'd be talking about schools anyway, but it's very different right now as some schools are back in person, others aren't. Some have both. And here in Texas, we have a governor that has been very enthusiastic about opening up the schools, unlike in some other states. So I'm going to try in the next couple of segments to keep it on schools and school choice and issues surrounding the schools. And I'll try to focus as much as I can on Texas, but we can go beyond that to other states. I will mention that Senator Ted Cruz released a statement after Senate Republican leadership unveiled their legislative package. And it's a targeted relief package for COVID. But part of it, and this just kind of goes along with what Erin Valdez was saying, part of it is to expand school choice. This is one of the issues that Ted Cruz is also very concerned about, and he's always pushed school choice. And again, he's taking the opportunity, he says, to help Americans who are hurting as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. He says, now more than ever, families from all walks of life are seeing the need for real school choice. If passed, this legislation will provide all families of the over 50 million school children across America with the flexibility and support they need to prevent their children from falling behind during these uncertain times. And so he has pushed this to be included in the relief package that Congress is talking about. And I think that's really great. So that would be the idea would be money following the student instead of going directly to the school. And that's basically what school choice is. And then also there's another component to what problems the coronavirus has caused for students in school. Texas has, 10% of Texas public school students actually need special education resources. And these aren't quite as easily replaced online in many cases. Many were left stranded when the schools closed abruptly in the spring. And, kids need to be connected with their therapists and their specialists, and some of it just cannot be done online. You need to be there. So that's been a real issue for a lot of families. And there's one family. This is one of the Texas newspapers. I'll tell you in a moment which one it is. But this is the story of a mother named Melissa, and she and her husband have gutted their savings. They spent more than $5,000 caring for their 3 children since March. Most of the money has gone to childcare and speech therapy for their daughter, Nora. 2 weeks ago, the couple put their house up for sale. 5-year-old Nora is on the autism spectrum, and she has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Before the pandemic, she attended school full-time in Katy, their independent school district there, and she had a suite of behavioral therapists. She had lots of people helping her out, speech therapists, special ed teachers, but that lifeline has been cut for nearly 6 months, and the parents have only been able to afford select specialists. And I think you multiply that by many, many, many Texans experiencing similar difficulties there. So, during that time, the student, for 6 months, losing out on that, can lose out on key sort of pieces, key skills, and learning how to communicate. For the autistic child, the child with autism, that's important, the communication with others. And this has been a big gap in that. And really, you think about it, there's not a whole lot that couldn't be done. But now that schools have the opportunity and the okay from the governor and everything else to open up, some aren't. And these special ed kids are probably put at a worse disadvantage than others. About 500,000 Texas public school students receive special ed services through their schools. And families really don't have the training to do some of this work. They can try and they can do some of it, and I know many have. But, to put them in front of a screen sometimes just doesn't work. So what this mom, Melissa, really wanted was for Nora to go back to school. She says, I worry most about her socialization because I don't want her to be lonely in life. That's a mother's heart speaking. And so that's just one story. There are many other stories. But there's been, a lot of criticism. I think everybody could look at their own schools and their reopening plans and find things they like about it and things they don't. But in some districts, well, this is this is still in Katy, the district's local health authority has mandated that schools remain closed to in-person learning until Harris County drops below the red alert level 1, which means the county needs to average 400 or fewer new cases of COVID-19 over a 14-day period, among other factors, according to their county reopening guidelines. Superintendents of 10 districts down there are pushing to get the schools back open. They say we must come to grips with the fact that in order to learn and grow, students must be healthy and safe. That means not setting arbitrary dates for reopening schools that provide false hope, dates this virus does not recognize or respect. So I think there are a lot of educators and also teachers unions who are they're pulling back. They're not wanting to push the reopening. And then there are others who are saying this can't be done well if it's not done in person. I know that in the communities around this area, and I'm thinking of a lot in Plano where I live, the schools are opening this week, the public schools, for anyone who can come and join and be in person. They are opening. And that date has been moved around, but they're there, and some are still doing it online. Others are not. There's a school district in South Texas called Fremont, excuse me, that will open its doors to students with disabilities in late August. So that already happened a week before welcoming general ed students back. And that's an idea, excuse me, a very good idea to bring those kids back and let them get started. Let them get a little bit of a head start before you bring the rest back. I mean, there are issues with distancing, so sometimes things can be done in stages. That's one idea. So just to think about those kids, the kids that need something special, I don't know, it's something that some parents haven't thought about, but it's a big piece of it here in Texas. And I'm glad it's being addressed. I'm glad some schools are beginning to open up. When it comes to school choice, I think we can go back to some of the success stories. And there was one I saw in the Wall Street Journal today about North Carolina. In North Carolina, there was $1.1 billion of relief money given to that state, their relief package. And they took part of it. Their legislature took part of it. I wrote a commentary about this earlier. And they funneled it toward exactly what we're talking about, school choice. They took a provision expanding the state's school choice program. They passed that. And then they are funding it with part of their COVID-19 dollars that came from the federal government. The state's Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, came into office after vowing to eliminate that program. But in late August, I guess he saw the writing on the wall, and they have gone ahead. And now there is a $2,000 bonus for all public school teachers. There are opportunity scholarships and programs for students. Actually, what happened was he proposed taking money from opportunity scholarships and basically giving it to teachers, but the legislature went a different direction. And so they are going to fund these scholarships, and I think it's a good idea. The bill expands the Opportunity Scholarship Voucher Program and raises the income limit for a family of 4 for getting it. And again, it's a case and an example of the money following the students. I think we're going to see many more stories and from different states about that type of thing happening, and I think it's something that's been long overdue. There's one other expert from Texas Public Policy that's also really great on this and on board, Emily Sass, and she says only 1 in 7 parents said their children will be returning to school full time. So we know that out there with remote schooling requiring so much help, that there's a lot of room for improvement out in our schools. 4 in 5 of the families with kids at home this fall will have no one else on hand to help. So I think school choice is something that we here in Texas need to work on to make work here and to pass some robust plans for it to help parents. And once that happens, I think the rest of the country will be able to look at us as a good example of how that works. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our conversation. And then in the next hour, boy, we have some great topics and guests to bring to you during the National Hour. So you will want to stick with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. As I mentioned, we've got several guests coming up in the next hour. First of all, Reverend Paul Sullins, who's with the Ruth Institute, is going to talk to us about the American Psychological Association's study that basically it just sort of says, oops, we interpreted our study wrong. And here's how we're going to interpret it now. Because originally they said that this research showed that children who received transgender surgery to change their gender just didn't do anything. Actually improved mental health for these children, that it was a positive benefit for kids. But as they looked at the data more closely, they basically reversed themselves and said that it does not provide mental health benefits to have transgender surgery. We could have probably all told them that, but a lot of times people even regret the surgery when they get older. We're going to talk with Reverend Paul Sullins about this. And then Jonathan Scruggs from Alliance Defending Freedom is going to join us because there was a victory in a court in Kentucky where the photographer actually was being forced. Actually, he was being forced out of business because he would not promote same-sex weddings. And this is a victory, and we're going to ask Jonathan Scruggs, who's the attorney for the photographer, how this is just to stop enforcement of it. So how is this case on the merits going, and what does he expect in the face of that Bostock decision by the U.S. Supreme Court? I thought that these cases were going to go the wrong way, but this one may go the right way, so we'll see. And then another guest, Kerri Toloczko, who actually I've known for a long time because she used to actually frequently co-host Point of View with me, but she doesn't live in Texas anymore. But she's vice president of policy at American Constitutional Rights Union. She's going to talk about military voting and the importance of making sure the members of the military are given timely opportunities to get their ballots in and why that's so important. And so we'll talk with her. So those are some of the issues that we will discuss in the National Hour coming up pretty soon. I do want to mention a couple more issues of education in the state of Texas. One is that this week, the Texas State Board of Education is considering revised health and science TEKS. Texas Education, I don't remember what TEKS stands for, but it's basically what needs to be covered. And they're revising the TEKS requirements, and there was a first reading this week and a vote. Actually, that's all taking place now. The testimony was begun yesterday morning at 9 a.m., and so parents were asked, and Jonathan Scruggs at Texas Values put something out to ask people who are interested in weighing in on this to go down to Austin and to testify. There's always battles over these requirements because the health and science topic, it covers all kinds of things with regard to sex education and LGBTQ issues and agendas. And that's exactly what's happening right now. In fact, pro-abortion and also LGBTQ rights groups certainly testified. In fact, they testified in June against abstinence-focused education. Abstinence is bad in their eyes. And in favor of propaganda, basically, that starts in kindergarten that's pro-LGBTQ. So, basically, not only is it sending a message for sinful behavior, but also introducing kindergartners to some things that, they ought not to be thinking about at that age. But the engagement of Texas parents has been encouraged, and certainly some of the folks we know at Texas Values and others, Eagle Forum and other groups, did testify. There's a draft now for the TEKS requirements that's supposed to be voted on this week that does not promote radical sex ed and does not contain pro-abortion or pro-LGBTQ propaganda. So that's what we hope passes. The first draft, let's see, is abstinence-focused and includes the advantages of abstinence from sexual activity. And then another part of this, of course, is the social justice component of the science TEKS. Introducing social justice also opens the door to LGBTQ advocacy. Doesn't belong in science. And that's what some parents are trying to testify right now. I'm always so grateful for the parents who get involved in this way, do the research, and then go and testify. I think that's what's done a lot of the hard spade work in, here in Texas. We've had some good abstinence programs. It's just that there's always a battle to keep it that way. There's one group that's been around for a long time trying to move everything left, the Texas Freedom Network, and another group called SECUS. They will be testifying this week. Perhaps they already have, for the pro-LGBTQ amendments to the final draft. So the believers in Texas that are concerned about education, are standing up for common sense and the health and science standards is something to pray for. And if you know people that are testifying, to encourage them as they go down there and as they are down there this week. That's what's going on. It's something that a lot of you may not have known. Even though schools are closing, they're making plans, and we're just hoping that they're successful in some of these efforts. Another piece of news about Texas is that Texas has renewed a court effort to ban an abortion procedure. Texas officials asked a federal appeals court's permission Tuesday to enforce a ban. This was the last Tuesday, not this week, to enforce a ban on a commonly used second trimester abortion procedure. And the court will be ruling on its constitutionality. The Fifth Circuit Court, a 3-judge panel, heard the arguments in November 2018, but they hadn't ruled yet. The same panel declined a Texas motion to allow enforcement of the law while it prepares its ruling. And that's what has been asked now of the full en banc 17-member court to consider this. So this kind of abortion that we're talking about is dismemberment abortion, which you're probably well aware of if you're a pro-lifer. And it's just to make it really pull the child limb from limb to remove the child, to enable the child to be removed from the mom. Forceps are used and other instruments to do that. The Texas legislature declared this brutal and inhumane, but abortion rights groups say the procedure, which is used in second trimester abortions, is known as the dilation and evacuation procedure. It forces women who could not or did not get an abortion in the first trimester to choose less safe, less effective options. So it's never good in the second trimester. It's never good any time. But these second trimester abortions, again, a picture of what abortion really is and that it's so brutal. This case has simmered at the Fifth Circuit for a long time, nearly 22 months. It was put on hold pending Supreme Court ruling in another case, that Louisiana case, that at the U.S. Supreme Court that went the wrong way. So now we worry that because they struck down some abortion restrictions in the state of Louisiana, that was a victory for abortion rights, and they're hoping that that will somehow pave the way to continue to allow these D&E abortions in the second trimester in Texas. Well, that's too bad. Ladies and gentlemen, those are a couple of things that are going on in the state of Texas. There's a lot. And as I mentioned, we've got several guests coming up next. I want to send you to pointofview.net because you'll be able to see the bios of all of our guests today and some of the things that they have written so you can get more information about the topics we're discussing. There's a donate button there that you'll hear about during the break. We always appreciate the generosity of our listeners. Stay with us over the break, and we'll be right back with a lot more Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me for Point of View. We have several guests, just one after another today, and I think you're going to enjoy this hour of Point of View. I'm going to get right into it because I've got some things that I want to share with you. Number one, we'll have an attorney from Alliance Defending Freedom to talk about a victory in Kentucky with regard to, one of those efforts to force photographers to photograph same-sex ceremonies and things like that. So there's a victory there. Then Kerri Toloczko from American Constitutional Rights Union is going to talk to us about military voting. But first, I want to bring in Reverend Paul Sullins. He is Senior Research Associate at the Ruth Institute, and he's brought to our attention the fact that there was a study done by the American Psychiatric Association, and it was covered in the American Journal of Psychiatry in a very interesting way. The conclusion was that transgender or gender reassignment surgery was helpful in people's mental health. But they looked at the data further and they found out something different. So Paul Sullins is here to discuss that. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon on this show. I love your intro. I sat and listened to it. It's very impressive.
Well, I'm glad that you joined me. Tell us how they backtracked.
Yeah, they not only suggested, right, the title of the study is this: Reduction in Mental Health Treatment Utilization Among Transgender Individuals After Gender-Affirming Surgery. So the conclusion was telegraphed in the title. And, the context for this is that we have a kind of a panic or a fad of persons, particularly younger persons, deciding that they're the wrong sex. They're a boy in a girl's body or a girl in a boy's body, and the technical term for this is gender dysphoria. And the treatment of preference today is to move those young people right into hormone treatments and then soon into gender reassignment surgery. It used to be very rare. Now it's not quite so rare, and it has lots of negative complications for that. Previous research had shown that transgender reassignment surgery did not provide any mental health benefits. In fact, provided lots and lots of very frightening mental health outcomes. And the main source of that surgery was the Swedish population registry. Now, Sweden, is a nanny state and has the government health care, and we all can have opinions about that. But one thing that happens is that they track the population from birth to death, and they have great medical records that are online and kept in databases, and researchers can study them. And so this group of researchers looked at the Swedish population registry, and they examined almost 3,000 persons who had gender dysphoria, many of whom had had surgery and many of whom had not. And they compared those two, and they alleged in their original article to show that those who had had surgery were less likely to get prescriptions for antidepressants later and to visit hospitals for mood and anxiety disorders. But there were lots and lots of problems and flaws in the study. It's hard to get into the technical aspects of this, but one major flaw that they had is that instead of doing a longitudinal study, which is where they take people's records when they're born and then they follow them forward and they take the dysphorics and the non-dysphorics and compare them. Instead, they used a retrospective design where they asked persons from the registry, did you ever have gender reaffirming surgery, and about the other aspects of their use, or they classified that with other aspects of their use of medical services. And the problem there is that if you ask somebody today, how disturbed were you by this surgery, the persons who are most disturbed are not going to be there to get the question. The prior study in this same data found that the rate of suicide among those who had undergone gender reassignment surgery was almost 20 times that of the general population. And so if you have a population where, about a fifth of persons are going to be committing suicide,
they're not there to answer the question later.
They're not there to answer the question. And what do you have? You have the survivors who are much less mentally disturbed by that. Now, that's only one problem. There are lots of other problems with this study. And so a group of scholars wrote a letter to the editors. In fact, 7 letters to the editors came out from 12 different scholars. They didn't. Each of them didn't know about the other until just recently, but this study got a lot of pushback, for which we can be thankful. Mm-hmm. And the journal underwent a review and published a correction just last month.
Well, you got to hand it to them for doing that, because it felt like there was an agenda with the original conclusion of the study.
Yeah, well, there is an agenda. This is a journal of the American Psychiatric Association. Like most mental health agencies, it has come out with affirmative statements about gender reassignment surgery, and we should be affirming of persons who want to change their sex. And so research that challenges that is more difficult to publish in their journal. And they have a particular bias. So it's particularly creditable of them that they listened to this pushback and they came out with this correction. Now, it isn't as strong as a correction as it should be. They're still working through this bias, but they did acknowledge that the study did not show that there was any benefit to surgery. They put that in writing. They didn't change the title, by the way, of the study. But they said that the main reason that this study has this title is not there. They didn't have this finding. And a couple of other minor errors that were in the study. And so it's important that this pushback occurred, because these studies get into legal settings and are used in court often to justify policies that can be very harmful to people.
Absolutely. We've discussed so often on this program the harm that's done. And, these surgeries are sometimes done before a child is really old enough to make such a decision. Yeah. And so thank you so much, Paul, for just explaining this to us. And, we'll have to come back and talk about this issue. I only have you for a segment today. But I appreciate it. It's really good news. And I hope that it's a sign that, others will be emboldened to push back when necessary. What do you think?
I think doing away with fear and having more courage and speaking the truth is always a good thing.
Well, thank you for doing that. Thanks for doing that today. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you, too.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a piece of good news, and certainly there's other good news with regard to this issue. There's a bill, actually, that has been introduced that would ban gender reassignment procedures on minors. This is in the U.S. Congress. So maybe we'll have time to discuss that a little bit later today or on a future show. But I think people are starting to see that this is never a good idea. Stay with us. We've got a lot more here on Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, in the past, both Republican and Democratic candidates have talked about abortion. Sometimes Republicans might avoid the topic, but rarely did Democrats. The assumption a few decades ago was that pro-choice was a winning theme, while being pro-life sometimes was a liability. The two national political conventions reversed the perspective on abortion. The topic was never mentioned in the Democratic National Convention. Abortion and pro-life comments surfaced many times in the Republican National Convention. The convention even featured a lengthy speech by Abby Johnson, who is a former Planned Parenthood clinic director and now a pro-life activist who founded the group And Then There Were None. In her speech, she talked rather graphically about abortion because she recognized that most Americans, she said, can't even conceive of the barbarity. In abortion clinics, they have to piece together the remains of babies. She even talked about the smell of abortion and asked, "Did you even know that abortion has a smell?" Her speech went a long way in educating the American public. Now, the silence about abortion at the Democratic Convention may have something to do with recent polls. The current view expressed by Democratic leaders is that abortion must be legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. Americans do not support such a view. While millions of Americans may believe that abortion should be legal, you only can find about 13% of Americans who support abortion through all 9 months. The Democratic platform and most leading Democratic leaders also call for taxpayer support of abortion. This isn't a popular view with most Americans. Nearly 80% oppose taxpayer-funded abortion, including about 3/4 of Democrats. All of this suggests that it will be the Republican candidates more than the Democratic candidates who will be talking about abortion this election season. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and it's nice to get some good news on the religious liberty and conscience front. A federal judge in Kentucky issued an important decision protecting the religious liberty of Chelsey Nelson, who is a Christian wedding photographer. Her attorney, Jonathan Scruggs from Alliance Defending Freedom, joins us to talk about it. He's director of the Center for Conscience Initiatives with ADF. He leads the team defending the constitutionally protected freedom of creative professionals to live out their faith in business and professional life without being subjected to government coercion, discrimination, and punishment. Leave it to ADF to have such a division. Jonathan earned his JD at Harvard Law School, and he was also a Blackstone Fellow at Alliance Defending Freedom. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here to explain what's happened in this Kentucky case. It's nice that they have actually granted this injunction. What's next?
Sure. Well, the next step will be a situation where we get to exchange documents with the other side, and then we get to ask the court to make this temporary relief permanent to protect Chelsey going forward from this law that would have forced her to promote visions of marriage that she disagreed with.
I've followed ADF for many years, almost since its founding, and I remember another case with a photographer that didn't go so well. Elaine Huguenin case out of, I think, New Mexico, and she was a photographer. But on this case, are you optimistic?
I'm very optimistic, and I think it goes to show you that case in New Mexico was just wrong, that you've now seen a growing trend in the federal courts like this case with Chelsey Nelson, another case out of Minnesota, a third case out of the state of Arizona, that have all protected the rights of artists to choose what messages they promote. And it's important to stress that this principle goes both ways. The government shouldn't be forcing an LGBT artist to criticize same-sex marriage, right? But in the same way, it should protect the right of Chelsey and people of faith to choose what messages they believe in, choose what messages they promote. So we're really excited to see where this prior ruling is said and to see where this case goes. It has the potential to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
So this photographer serves everyone. It's just a matter of, as we've seen in so many of these wedding vendor cases, they don't want to endorse or they don't want to participate in a same-sex marriage ceremony, right?
That's exactly right. There are numerous situations where Chelsey would serve those in the LGBT community and those in all different communities. But just because you're willing to create photographs for someone doesn't mean you have to create every photograph possibly created, no matter the content of that photograph. That whether you be a photographer or calligrapher or printer, whether you be a journalist, a newspaper writer, you can't be forced to write words and to photograph things that violate your core convictions. And that's the principle that the court said in its opinion, that America is big enough for those with differing views, and that means it should be big enough for those of people of faith as well.
Absolutely. And so, Jonathan, what about, I don't know, you're going to have to explain to me how these interrelate, but I was so discouraged with the Bostock Supreme Court decision. Does that do anything to make your job harder?
Well, when you have an unfortunate ruling like that, it kind of makes your life harder, our job harder generally. Thankfully, this case is a big cabin off from that situation. That situation involved what it means to discriminate in the context of Title VII, which is about employment discrimination. But thankfully, courts have started to treat speech differently and said, look, speakers have the right that really other people, essentially non-speakers, don't. And we are, again, we're excited about this ruling because it affirms that principle, affirms it from both sides, but we're also excited because it protects a religious speaker. That religious people don't have less rights than others, and religious people can speak the messages they believe in. So regardless of that Bostock decision, in this case, in this context, the government shouldn't be coming in and saying, you've got to adopt our agenda, you've got to adopt our beliefs and our views, and you've got to say those views out of your mouth, essentially. And that's essentially been a consistent principle both before Bostock and after. And that's why we're excited that eventually one of these cases is going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court is going to agree with this logic that's just really so clear and that courts have generally been adopting in recent times.
I know that you at ADF have been laying the groundwork with all the other wins that you've had. I mean, you've had the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, which was a great win, but it didn't quite, it was more about hostility to religion. And then your other cases, though, the one at the 8th Circuit where the Minnesota Christian couple, the Larsons, were you guys won that, and that protected their abilities to do wedding videos and not do the wedding videos that they didn't want to do, that violated their faith. And then the Arizona Supreme Court ruling about the calligraphers. We read about that. Brush and Nib Studio, and they couldn't be compelled to create messages that ran contrary to their faith. So you've been winning these. And so, you feel pretty optimistic about a final win in this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I often get that question, right? Didn't you already decide? Didn't Masterpiece already decide this? Wasn't this already ruled on? And unfortunately not. Unfortunately, the Masterpiece case didn't rule on every issue. It didn't rule on the big picture issue of can the government force a speaker to convey a message they disagreed with, generally in the context of a business. And that's the ultimate ruling that we're driving for, because we really think that's going to protect people of faith, that the government can't come in and essentially say, look, you can go into your business, but you've got to leave your faith behind, that you can't say what you believe, and in fact, you've got to say the opposite of what you believe. And what that effectively does is it makes it impossible for people of faith to go into business, to live out their faith, to interact with their clients and try to honor them and serve them. That the government shouldn't be doing that. It shouldn't be saying leave a big part of who you are at the door and comply with what we believe in. So ultimately, we are hopeful to get that big ruling to address the big picture issue that basically says, free speech is for everyone. It's not just for those who agree with the government. And that includes about the topic of marriage, that people of faith can hold to their religious beliefs about marriage, can enter into their businesses, and can really operate their businesses without fear that the government's going to come in and say, we're going to fine you, we're going to put you into bankruptcy unless you avow the view of marriage we think is approved.
Yeah, it's bullying. And, when the Obergefell decision came down, there was language in there that talked about religious liberty, and yet it didn't make those of us who are believers feel that great, because it left it open that there would be a problem with religious liberty. And certainly the problem is the battle you're fighting right now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was very vague language, and that's exactly why you had some lower courts seize on some of that language and compel that photographer, as you mentioned, in New Mexico. We represent Barronelle Stutzman. He's a florist out of Washington. Her case is pending to see whether the U.S. Supreme Court accepts it or not. So you see some bad rulings, but recently you see this trend of courts recognizing, again, that our country is big enough for people with different views, that we shouldn't be ostracizing people of faith because they've adopted a view of marriage that the majority of the world has adopted for the history of all time. But instead, we should give people the right to say, to choose what they say and to choose what they believe. And that means doing that in the context of a business that they run. And it means not having the government come in and say, hey, we are going to fine you, we're going to put you out of business unless you literally sometimes write words. And, in this situation, Chelsey's not just a photographer, but she blogs about her weddings. So you can imagine the kind of burden of her conscience of being compelled to blog in support of a marriage that she disagrees with, in support of same-sex marriage.
Yes. Jonathan, you're doing great work. You're really doing God's work, and you're uniquely qualified to do that. And we're so grateful that you are. And thank you so much for joining me today to explain all of this.
No, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the time you've given about this important issue.
Jonathan Scruggs from Alliance Defending Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an organization that you ought to pray for. And I will mention that if this case goes the right way, it will be another tool in the toolbox for our friends at First Liberty Institute for their case up in the state of Oregon, Melissa Klein, who's been battling for 7 years with regard to her wedding cake business that she did have at one time, where she too did not want to tell a story about a same-sex wedding. And so she was basically persecuted and put out of business, and they've been in the battle for 7 years. And so, all of these rulings now that are supporting people's religious speech rights in their businesses are going to also help that case. We do hope one goes to the Supreme Court. We need to pray to that end. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next up, we're going to talk about military voting, making that easier and possible this election.
It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
I'm so excited about my next guest because she's someone that has been in the studio here at Point of View with me a lot. When she lived in the state of Texas, sometimes she would come and co-host with me, and her name is Kerri Toloczko. She's Vice President of Policy at the American Constitutional Rights Union. Kerri, thanks for joining me today.
It's so great to be with you, Penna. I just wish I were in the seat next to you, that's all.
I do too. It was always fun to have you in, and you are you have this wide range of subjects that you're an expert on. But I love the one that we're going to talk about today, Kerri, because first of all, you've been with this organization for, 2 or 3 years now, and you've helped them grow, and they're tackling a lot of issues. One, though, today, and this is special for you because you've got a son in the military, is military voting. I mean, these people serving us, Kerri, and yet often they don't have the opportunity to vote as easily or to register to vote. And yet, we're putting them out there to serve us. So that doesn't seem right or fair, but you've got ways to remedy the situation, don't you?
Right. It's more, as far as the ease goes, it's more intimidation of the process than the difficulty of the process. So at ACRU, we've started a project called Protect Military Votes, and that, just as you said, is the purpose, is to explain to both military service members as well as their spouses, it's easy to vote and you should vote. We keep having this debate here in the States about how to go, and we are very much against the solicited universal ballots, the unsolicited universal ballots. And for voting in person and all that stuff. Well, our military, they don't really have a choice. We have 1.3 million service members serving at any snapshot in time, and about 340,000 of those, with 78,000 spouses, which is 500,000 voters, are stationed abroad, including my son, who's a lieutenant in Italy. And the military does its best to get the notion out there that, you have to vote. But we feel like back here at home, we owe them so much that we started this project to make sure we could make it easy for them to figure out how to vote.
Well, we've posted this article that Kerri wrote, ladies and gentlemen, at pointofview.net. Military jobs are hard. Military voting is not. The time is now. So you say, Kerri, that less than 2/3 of our military were registered to vote in 2018. So is that a difficulty in itself? Do you have to do that while you're stateside, or can you register if you're overseas?
Nope, you can register and request a ballot in the same internet session. We have on our protectmilitaryvotes.org website, if anyone goes there, they just have to click resources, and that link will take them directly. Everything's an acronym, right? It's called VFAP, the Federal Voting Assistance Program. So that click will take them into the VFAP, where all they have to do is, it'll say, what is your home state? And you say Texas, and then it says, all right, this is what you need to do to register. This is what you need to do to request an absentee ballot. And it all magically happens. It's really, really easy. And that's kind of the disappointing part for us, looking at that low registration rate and looking at that low participation rate and realizing that it's more intimidating than it is difficult. So really encouraging our military service members, and they're voting for their boss.
Yeah.
A vote for the candidate that supports the military is a vote for themselves, or in the case of a spouse, a vote to protect your spouse. So it's a really, really important thing.
So is part of your mission then to raise awareness among members of the military?
Yes, absolutely. And we created a magical day called September 1st, which was what we called Military Voting Readiness Day. And one of the reasons we did that is looking at the Postal Service, which I'm sure you've talked about in previous shows, and the lack of delivering things on time. So for the military, this is more of a pressing issue than either, those of us in the States, making sure they get that absentee ballot as early as humanly possible so it gets back and doesn't get legitimately lost, never mind fraudulently lost, but at least not legitimately lost. So the states, by federal law, have to supply an absentee ballot when requested, and these have to be requested by the military 45 days in advance of an election. And that day is really September 16th for this year.
Next
week. So all military have to request a ballot. There's none of this unsolicited random ballots going out to the military. So it does have to be requested. And again, it's really easy, but we want to make sure they do it long before September 16th, really, just to make sure with the mail and all the problems that can happen that they receive their ballot and that it gets back to their polling station.
So does your website tell them how to request the ballot if they don't know?
Yes. Just go to protectmilitaryvotes.org and hit the resource tab, and boom, it's right there in front of you. It's super simple to do.
Okay, well, that's good. And, I think that folks that are listening right now, this is really good for them to have this tool to help people that they know that are in the military, or their kids or their family members, or just friends. Because, sometimes, I know that I, in my life, am always one that's encouraging people to vote, especially people I know are conservative. And I think, as far as military, I would think that most members of the military would lean conservative. Is that the case?
They do. In 2016, in the presidential election, 61% of veterans voted for Donald Trump, and 54% of active duty members voted for Donald Trump. And I think the military, despite recent false stories circulating amongst us, understand exactly what conservatives do for military. Conservatives support the military. They give raises. They take care of the people in the VA. These things really matter, and so that message is just really important. And one interesting thing. So when I did a piece a while ago about military spouse voting, I talked to a couple of Connor's friends, his lieutenants, the wives. And
Connor is your son.
Connor is my son, and one of the things one of the young women told me was that she knows this isn't true, but she was told that absentee ballots for military only count as provisional ballots and don't really matter.
Not true.
And that just really not true. Absolutely 100% not true. So I said to her, that's not true, and she said, I do, and I tell everybody that. But this is, I think, you hear these rumors. My son tells me that the Army's a rumor mill that's worse than a junior high classroom full of girls. He says that all the time. So, you have these rumors circulating, your vote doesn't really count. Yes, it absolutely does. Not only does it count, but it really counts because, again, you're voting directly for your boss. Most of us have a boss that we see face-to-face, we interact with regularly. The commander-in-chief is the boss of the military. And they don't get to see that person directly. So that creates a space. And the only way they can shrink that space is by voting directly for the commander-in-chief of their choice.
I guess so. I think one other reason, well, you can tell me, you can answer this question. President Trump is one of his key, I think, really emotional positions is that he does not want to involve us in wars. He does everything he can to avoid that and to get us out. And I would think that if I were in the military, I would appreciate that position, even though that's your job. But there's going to be plenty of work for our members of the military, but not to willy-nilly send our troops overseas, especially when you're a parent of a member of the military.
Oh, right.
I would think that would gain him support, and that's being talked about a lot right now.
Well, I would think so. Now, certainly, if I were a military spouse, and again, we've got 78,000 of them overseas, that's just abroad, I would be looking at the person who's protecting my spouse, whether it be a husband or a wife. And you're right, not only have we pulled out of conflicts successfully, I might add, but they have more stuff to play with now. They have more combat aircraft. They have more helicopters. They have more nuclear forces, space assets, communication devices. In fact, the Navy, I was talking to a Navy commander the other day, and he was talking about the technology that they just got some kind of new package, and it makes it so much easier for his guys on his ship to vote because now they have the satellite technology that is a quicker downlink. So, if you are in the military and you've been in there since 2016 and you've now had a 6% pay raise across the board from a commander-in-chief, I would think that, that's certainly going to influence your vote.
One would think so. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. During the break, you can find Kerri's picture at pointofview.net and also click through to their website. And that Protect Military website will be of great help to you. Also, give us a call if you'd like to talk to Kerri, 800-351-1212 about military voting or other issues of the military. Perhaps you have a child in the military like she does. So we'd love to talk to you, 800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Kerri Toloczko is also with me. We're talking about the U.S. military. I do want to mention, though, that in the next hour, I will be joined by Kayla Stoecklein, who has written a book that just came out. It was released yesterday, Fear Gone Wild. It is a heartrending story of mental illness and her husband, a megachurch pastor, and she have gone through this. And she tells the story in this book. It's just compelling, and you won't want to miss that in the next hour of Point of View. But Kerri is with me. And Kerri, as we talk about military voting, which, as you said, it has to be done by absentee, and you mentioned that you were just going to dismiss fraud as a problem and just talk about the other problems that can occur. But what about fraud in military voting? Is there a great potential for that?
Yes, there is. We kind of call it all the fraud you cannot see. So there have been cases, particularly here where I live now in Florida, in Broward County, the famous Broward County.
Oh, really?
In 2016, the people working at the polling station were caught red-handed filling in ballots, hand paper ballots for military members. And when asked, the excuse was, oh, they came in over the fax machine, and we're just putting them onto a piece of paper so we can shove it through our machine.
Really?
So if you believe that, right, yes. Has been until recently a very corrupt county. But we've had tips and stories and conversations with people over the last couple of months who have mentioned, my son went to vote the second time. The first time was in the military, and when he went to vote the second time in the next election, not in the same election, in the next election, they had not recorded his absentee ballot. He found that he hadn't voted. So that's one of the reasons why we're really pressing the military to get to protectmilitaryvotes.org and do that registration and request that ballot right away. We just feel like the more time a ballot has to get safely where it's supposed to be, the less time it has to get messed up by people who want to interfere with it. And one of the other things that happened in a Florida county was in 2016 presidential election, a whole bunch of military absentee ballots were magically found either in someone's trunk or the closet. I can't remember exactly where. So they are not always treated with the highest level of respect that they should be treated with when they get overseas or when they get back here from overseas.
Kerri, I do understand that when you request an absentee ballot, you can track it to see where your request is, where your ballot is. And so do you have sort of an explanation of how to do that at your website?
No, we don't, but the VFAP, the Federal Voting Assistance Program, that is the click-through from our website. They have information about that on there. It's very, very detailed. Where's your state, how to send back your absentee ballot, how to fill it out, what needs to go on the envelope. None of it's difficult, and also how to track it. So
I just think it's important because that's intimidating to go try to figure out how to track it, even though you can track it. So to have a link, it's good. I'm glad you do.
They've done a great job. The federal government updated the way the military votes about 4 or 5 years ago when House Republicans passed a new bill called the MOVE Act, for the sake of argument. And since then, it's gotten a lot better. And President Trump also signed a new military voting act, I think December of 2019, and that made instructed the website to update it and make it a little bit more people-friendly and less intimidating. So all of that is really good. And in the good news category of life, I talked to my son this morning from Italy, and he said that he walked across the base and they had set up a table to register voters, and I thought that was great. So, it's kind of up to your base commander, really, how active they're going to be in the voting process. A lot of them are awfully busy.
Yeah.
So it was encouraging to hear that at least in Vicenza, Italy, they're grabbing people coming out of the commissary and asking them if they've registered.
Well, that is good. And, on that note, we all have concerns about universal mail-in voting, about this push to get more and more voting being done by mail rather than in person, which is, I'm going to go in person. And I encourage everyone I know just to go in person, make a statement, and do it the way that, is so much safer. But are you concerned about this push for mail-in voting?
Extremely concerned. And it's easy to defend being extremely concerned. We listed, I think, 12 stories on our website in a row, boom, 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 the other day. Just the 12 we found in an hour about ballots going astray in the primaries. NPR reported that 550,000 ballots went astray and went uncounted because of mail problems or fraud or who knows why. That's a lot of votes.
Yeah,
That's to swing the election vote. Mailing an unsolicited ballot to some random address where somebody may or may not live anymore, who may or may not even be alive anymore, is really a problem because anyone can get their hands on it. And one of our other projects, which is for another day, but it's Protect Elderly Votes. And we have a real hard push to protect the votes, particularly people of senior residences, because they are going to be at really high risk for fraud. So we tell everybody they need to be a VIP, vote in person.
Yeah.
If you're a mask person, wear your mask. Most places are going to require you to wear one anyway, so just bring it with you. Wash your hands. Don't stand too close to your neighbor, and vote in person. It is the singular only way you know 100% your vote's going to be counted. It's going to be counted with the box that you ticked, and it's only going to be counted once.
Yeah, and when you look at a polling place, I mean, the social distancing is already done there in normal times, so I feel pretty good about that. I did notice you mentioned Protect Elderly Votes. I've got a piece in front of me by Ken Blackwell, which is, I know, he's one of your colleagues there at the ACRU, and that's another topic for a fuller treatment. But can you just give me a minute or so on that?
Sure. We are particularly concerned about ballot fraud, not just lost ballots, but real ballot fraud in assisted livings and nursing homes, because a lot of the residents need help filling it out. A lot of volunteers, and I'm making quotation marks with my fingers, come in to help them. Mm-hmm. They may or may not tick the box that the senior residence likes. What if, like my mom couldn't see at the end? She wouldn't know what box you ticked. And then the ballot harvesters are also trying to get into the nursing homes to collect all the ballots. This is a very strong ongoing push by the left. One, to get the ballot harvesters in senior residences, and two, to get the volunteers in there. So let's just say you give your vote to a ballot harvester of the opposite party in which they just helped you vote. And that ballot harvester passes a trash can on the way to the polling station. Where do you think your ballot's going to end up? So our line is stranger danger. Never trust a stranger with your ballot. If you're in an assisted living, turn to a family member. States actually have laws about who can help. And we feel like the first line of defense to protect our seniors' votes are the executive directors and the managers at these residential facilities. So we've sent notifications and letters to them saying, look, this is going to be a problem. You need to train your staff. You need to inform your residents. You need to make sure that every single ballot in your facility is counted as desired by the senior.
Kerri, thank you so much for all of the great information today. It's really good to have you on, and we'll have you again. Also want to have Lori on to talk about Protect Elderly Votes. You guys are doing great, timely work. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you, Penna. Bye-bye.
That's Kerri Toloczko, and that group, we really need to be involved in getting people voting.
Civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I want to mention the next hour, my guest will be Kayla Stoecklein. On August 25th, 2018, she lost her husband, Andrew, megachurch pastor of Inland Hills Church in Chino, California. She lost him to suicide. In the wake of her overwhelming tragedy, she embarked on a brave journey to better understand Andrew's harrowing battle with mental illness and ultimately to overcome the stigma of suicide. She will share her journey in her book. It debuted yesterday, released yesterday from Thomas Nelson Books. She will join me in the final half hour of the program today. I hope you'll stick with me. It's a compelling story, one that I couldn't put the book down. But I do want to point you to pointofview.net to a piece that I posted, and I don't even know how to pronounce one of the words in the title, but the icosahedron in number 12-foot Trevor Smith, PhD, and Chris Wilson on the rise impact on 2020. That's the title. And the bottom line is this. They asked their pollsters. Chris Wilson is a great pollster. He's a friend of my husband's and mine. And he does a great job, and he polls for a lot of political figures. And the question that I want to ask you right now, and you can call in at 800-351-1212, is will the rioting that's been going on in cities across the country impact the election? After George Floyd's murder on May 25th, there was righteous anger across the political spectrum, not very many answers. We saw the peaceful protests, but they weren't all peaceful. We also saw rioting, looting, burning, and even physical violence going on. And the Democrats really didn't address it. Even at their convention, they didn't address it. But right after the convention, they started seeing polling changing. And prominent Democrats and liberals, for instance, Don Lemon at CNN, said the rioting has to stop. It's showing up in the polling. It's showing up in focus groups. It is the only thing right now that is sticking. So my question for you, I'd love to have lots of you call in and tell us, do you, first of all, think the riots are justified? And second of all, because there are a lot of people that do think that, which is crazy since they violate the rights of business owners who are having their businesses and livelihoods destroyed. But I would love to hear from you, and I won't let you say your piece. If you think they're justified. Will they impact the election is the other question. What do you think? And the number, again, is 800-351-1212. We would love to hear from you. Another Democrat, the Democratic mayor of Madison, Wisconsin, said on the 27th of August, there's no doubt it's playing into Trump's hand. This is of the riots. There's a significant number of undecided voters who are not ideological, and they can move very easily from Republican to Democrat column and back again. And then this is what Joe Biden said about it on the 24th of August. He said, as I said, after the George Floyd murder, protesting brutality is a right and absolutely necessary, but burning down communities is not protest, is needless violence that endangers lives, guts businesses and shutters businesses and serve the community. Well, he certainly said the right things, just perhaps a little bit late. So some of the other questions that are answered in this polling, and it's very well laid out that you can read these polls. One of the questions answered is, how big of a problem is racism in our society? Is it a big problem? And of the respondents to the poll, overall 67% said racism is a big problem, and 5% said it's not at all a problem. And then you can go out into the categories white, black, GOP, independent, and Democrat. For instance, is racism a problem? 43% of Republicans thought it was, and 6% of Republicans thought it was not at all a problem. 90% of Democrats thought it was a problem, and less than 1% thought it was not a problem at all. But here's the other question, the one that I really want you folks to answer, and I see people are calling in. Are the violence protests that occurred in the short time frame after George Floyd's murder, are they justified? And again, here's the answers from the WPA polling company from Chris Wilson's group. Overall, 27% said the riots were justified, the violent part of this, and 69% they were unjustified. If you look at whites, 23% of whites said it was justified, 73% said it was not justified. And blacks that were polled, 39% said the violence in the rioting was justified, and 58% not justified. Of the Republicans, 9% said the violence was justified, 90% said it was unjustified. I think this is huge. I think the riots will affect the election. I truly do. Of Democrats, 42% thought the violence was justified, and 53% said unjustified. And in June, this also says that there was a strong favorable attitude expressed toward Black Lives Matter, but that has disintegrated to a great degree in the ensuing months. The opposition to Black Lives Matter has more than doubled in its increase compared to the decrease in support, and it's direct. They conclude it's directly linked to the riots. Well, let's go now to the phones, take some of your calls. Jimmy is in Texas. Jimmy, you're on Point of View.
Yes, ma'am. Who am I speaking with?
Penna Dexter. I'm co-hosting today. I'm actually guest hosting today for Kirby.
Let me get out of this. To answer your question, of course,
Hello? Looks like we might have lost Jimmy. He says at least this is what he told our screener. I don't know is he gone, Steve? He's completely gone. Okay. Well, he says he's asking a question himself. He says, does personal responsibility matter at all to these rioters? That's a good question. That's a very good question. I hope he calls back. I guess it sounds like he got into a spot where the call failed. Too bad. We'd love to hear back from you, but we've got some other folks calling in. So once those get connected, we'll take another one. I know that Steve's getting a little bit overwhelmed here, but that's good because we do want to hear from you. We want to know what you think about this. I am certain that the Democrats have probably looked at these polls because they're beginning to address this somewhat, but I don't know if it was a bit too little too late to affect the election or not. And I don't know how important this is to voters as an issue. Where does it rank in issues? To me, it's very important. But, a lot of people aren't paying attention. Well, let's actually, I'm not going to take this call, but Emmett in Arkansas, listening in on KMTC, I will take your call in a minute after the break because we're just about to come up on a break. But let me, during the break, point you to the article. It's one of the last articles. If you go to pointofview.net and read more, and you can scroll way down and you'll find the article. It's really interesting. It's something you might want to print out and share. Ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. We've got more of Point of View. Thanks for sticking with us this far, and we hope you will continue. We'll be back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, in the past, both Republican and Democratic candidates have talked about abortion. Sometimes Republicans might avoid the topic, but rarely did Democrats. The assumption a few decades ago was that pro-choice was a winning theme, while being pro-life sometimes was a liability. The two national political conventions reversed the perspective on abortion. The topic was never mentioned in the Democratic National Convention. Abortion and pro-life comments surfaced many times in the Republican National Convention. The convention even featured a lengthy speech by Abby Johnson, who is a former Planned Parenthood clinic director and now a pro-life activist who founded the group And Then There Were None. In her speech, she talked rather graphically about abortion because she recognized that most Americans, she said, can't even conceive of the barbarity. In abortion clinics, they have to piece together the remains of babies. She even talked about the smell of abortion and asked, "Did you even know that abortion has a smell?" Her speech went a long way in educating the American public. Now, the silence about abortion at the Democratic Convention may have something to do with recent polls. The current view expressed by Democratic leaders is that abortion must be legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. Americans do not support such a view. While millions of Americans may believe that abortion should be legal, you only can find about 13% of Americans who support abortion through all 9 months. The Democratic platform and most leading Democratic leaders also call for taxpayer support of abortion. This isn't a popular view with most Americans. Nearly 80% oppose taxpayer-funded abortion, including about 3/4 of Democrats. All of this suggests that it will be the Republican candidates more than the Democratic candidates who will be talking about abortion this election season. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. I'm Penna Dexter. We're taking your calls here at Point of View, 1-800-351-1212. The question is, will the riots taking place in cities across the country affect the election? Let's go to Emmett in Arkansas, listening in on KMTC. Hi, Emmett. What are your thoughts?
Hey, how are you?
Great.
Well, my thoughts are that
Oh, no. Where'd he go? What's going on? Are you there, Emmett?
No, they keep getting rid of Emmett and everybody else and never got to Reggie.
Are you Emmett?
No.
Okay, let me go back to Emmett. So I'll come back to you. We got some phone problems here. Emmett, are you there? I don't know what's happening here. Okay, I'm going to go to the next caller. Okay, this is Penna. Who am I talking to?
This is Reggie.
Okay, Reggie, tell me your comments on the question of the day, which is, first of all, what do you think of the riots? And second of all, will they impact the election?
Well, really, it's so hard to make a decision, but my determination on it is I don't think it was really did what it wanted to do.
Didn't do what it wanted to do.
Yes, a lot of it was destructive, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a retired military guy, and a lot of it was destructive. I know people were angry, but a riot, when you say riot, that word gives a bad connotation to something going on instead of just disagreeing. And I know that some things were bad and terrible, but riot is not. I don't think rioting is in a way to get anything accomplished. And as far as the other part of the question, will it affect the elections? I really think it will. I think it will not, as because so many other things have happened. It's not going to take the effect as much as a lot of people may think. I think because of the fact that it's some time has passed and a whole bunch of things have happened on the earth and the world, really, with the pandemic and everything else, that they're going to slide out of this without the riots, meaning so much of being
What
so
if
much
they,
of a.
what if they, first of all, tell me where you are calling from. Because,
I'm calling from Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay.
Bible Belt.
So you don't really have riots happening near you.
We did, unbelievably, we did in Columbia, South Carolina. We were one of the first ones to have it after the death. We were one of the first ones, and I was really shocked because my parents are from here, and we did have a real bad one. For a time, we had a bad one.
Did law enforcement deal with it?
Yes, they had to. Law enforcement had to deal with it because of it got that bad. And I was really surprised. I've been here about 15 years after retirement from the military.
Yeah, so I think that is part of it, is whether or not law enforcement deals with it. Could be also an election issue. Listen, Reggie, thank you so much. He says really that it didn't do what it wanted to do, the rioting, and he doesn't know how much it'll affect the election. So we'd love to know what folks think. Reggie, thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Emmett. Emmett, are you there now?
I am.
Good. I'm glad I've got you. I'm
here.
sorry about the mix-up on the lines. I think they literally did get crossed. But we want to know from you, first of all, do you agree? Do you think the riots are a good thing to make a point about the George Floyd murder and all of those things, or are they a bad thing? And also, do you think they'll affect the election? What do you think?
Well, there's both good and bad in it. Certainly violence is never good unless you're fighting directly against the oppressor. But the people affected in all the rioting had very little to do with how somebody got hurt or how they didn't. And we've got a lot of trouble here in America, as is in any place in the world. But none of these things really are going to solve it. But the one good thing I can pick out that it possibly did, if a lot of people are like me and my wife, we're always working. We don't have a whole lot of time to be really informed. This show is good for informing me about some things, but I miss a lot. And in our local government, I'm now in a position at least to hear, although I have no authority on anything, but at least hear some of the problems that are coming our way as a indirect association with some of the rioting. And
what are some of those?
They want to have riots here in a little bitty town. And our local authorities have been really successful in squelching some of it. But we don't mind protesting. That's what America's all about. I protest against things all the time. And I'm not well liked for it necessarily. You know, they might be Christian values. But other people have different values. I understand that. But I don't go around hitting anybody with a 2x4 or putting a gun to somebody's head for any reason, unless they're directly confronting me or my family, something that would be worthy of doing it, and then it would help. But the thing I see as a good association with rioting is that I think that it might possibly awaken a sleeping giant, and that would be like me and my wife, who work all the time, who don't have all the time to go and stand. I don't have time to go out and protest a lot of things unless it was going to really do some good, or it's so significant to me that I would do it.
So you say it would awaken you to, what would it awaken you to?
Well,
what kind of action would you take in response?
I think when people go to the polls, they're going to say, I've had enough of this. I got a business. I got things that I've worked for. I don't want somebody over there coming and taking it over, regardless of what happens. So I'm going to vote in people that might do something sane to solve the problem, not make another one in association with it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
So I just hope that it does that. I hope that it does. I hope America wakes up and the conservative people and that would be me, but or somebody that would love our country and love our way of living would stand up for what is right. And if they do, they'll go to the polls. And that would be something that would be positive in a negative experience.
Well, we have the opportunity so soon that, just to channel our opinions, our passion into the voting booth right now, or perhaps corralling folks too, that are affected. Thank you so much for that call. I really appreciate it. Let's go to California now and listen to Vamisha on KYCC. Hi, Vamisha. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, can you hear me okay? I'm on speaker.
Yes, I can hear you. What do you think about rioting? Does it do anything? Does it accomplish anything good? And will it affect the elections?
Okay, I do not believe that rioting will accomplish anything good. I believe that protesting, peaceful protesting, as Martin Luther King did, that's what was effective. Regardless of what these people are doing in the street, I see a generation, it seems like it's a lot of people, a generation who's lost, who have no God. I believe it's going to affect the elections wholeheartedly. I really pray that Christians especially would just get out there and vote God's conscience. I'm believing that, since even Don Lemons on CNN mentioned something about, it's showing up in the polls, that just tells you right then and there, I hate to say it, but just the Democratic side, they do not care. They just do not really care about the people. It's about power, and it's about, we got to do this now. So I'm just really praying that we would vote God's conscience. I used to be a Democrat when I was younger because I was told to be, and I'm African American, and when I got saved, filled with the Holy Ghost, I recognized that the Lord wants us to vote for his values. And it's not about a party, it's about what they believe in. President Trump came in, and he just came out of nowhere, which I'm thankful for. I was going to vote for Ted Cruz, but God directed me towards President Trump, and I've prayed for him since day one. Ever since he's been elected, I've prayed for him every day, and I just pray that people would really vote God's conscience, and these people need to be prayed for. They also need to be arrested out there rioting. It does no good for the community. It has nothing to do with African Americans, nothing to do with George Floyd.
No, now it's really to advance leftist ideas and leftist causes. It's been co-opted. Yeah. Listen, thank you so much. What a wonderful call, Vamisha. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for a point of view and everything. I love all of you. Thank you.
Well, that is encouraging. Ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net and find this polling article, the Isahedron, number 12. You will want to look at this, find some of these great numbers that are informative, I think will help you, especially if you're involved in driving elections in any state. And ladies and gentlemen, next up, I am going to have the privilege of interviewing Kayla Stoecklein on her new book, Fear Gone Wild. Heartrending story, very bold and brave and godly young woman will be telling it to us. So stay with us for more Point of View. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Ladies and gentlemen, one psychiatrist who's quoted by our next guest in her book, Fear Gone Wild, which was released yesterday, said, "We know but a drop in the ocean about the brain." And ladies and gentlemen, this makes dealing with mental illness a daunting challenge. But Kayla Stoecklein had to deal with it in her megachurch pastor husband. She is with us to tell the story. Kayla, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Well, it's an honor to have you. Your book was released yesterday, and so I feel honored that we get to be an early interview as you talk about this very important issue. And I just will tell the audience that your husband, Andrew, became pastor of Inland Hills Church, which is a large church in Chino, California, not thinking he wanted to follow his dad into the ministry at first, but changed his mind while a student at a Christian college, Vanguard University, which actually I had a niece that went there, so I'm familiar with that school. Kayla, tell us about your love story.
Yeah, we met. It was my sophomore year of college, his junior year, and one of my best friends was dating one of his best friends. And so one night she went over. They all lived in a big beach house right on the sand in Newport Beach. Disgusting, gross beach house. It had like sand into the carpet. The sand was always wet because they surfed all the time. It was just like a man cave. So she was over there one day, and she showed Andrew a picture of her friends. And he picked me out of the picture, and like, I want to get to know her. And so I showed up with a friend, and I was so nervous, and met him, and we just fell in love fast. It was a quick fall into love. A year later, he proposed, and then a year after that, in December 2010, we were married.
So Andrew had a father who was a successful pastor in Inland Hills Church in Chino, just up the road from Newport Beach. And he fell ill, didn't he?
He did, yeah. So about a year into our marriage, less than a year into our marriage, it was October. Actually, you know what? It was November of 2011. He was diagnosed with leukemia, and it was completely shocking. Adored pastor in the community. People loved him, like leader of our family, amazing man, such an incredible, humble, just deeply amazing man, and we all admired him and looked up to him so much. So it was a huge devastation to our family and our church. And so he wrestled with leukemia for 4 years. There was remission and relapse, and then ultimately in 2015, we knew that it was getting worse, and so we had this really special service, and his dad was in a wheelchair at the time, and we wheeled his dad onto the stage, and he had a little baton that was engraved with Andrew's name and the date and the church, and he handed Andrew a literal baton and passed the mantle of leadership to him. And so Andrew became the lead pastor, and just a few months later, in October of 2015, he passed away.
So Kayla, Andrew, though, didn't just jump into it, because all during those 4 years of illness, he'd been helping his father, hadn't he?
He had, and when he first started at Inland Hills, we had a little breakaway right after we got married. We went to Seattle for a little bit and kind of just wanted to go do our own thing. But we always felt drawn to his parents' church. So we came back right before his dad got sick. And I really believe that was all God's timing. God brought us back. God knew his dad was going to get sick. And so we were there, and Andrew was in it. I mean, really in it. We have pictures of him and his dad sitting in the hospital room at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in LA, and they both have their laptops open, and they're planning message series, booking guest speakers, working on messages together, working on the staff organization charts, all from this little hospital room. So in a lot of ways, Andrew was co-leading the church with his dad. There were a lot of Sundays where his dad was scheduled to speak. His dad was still speaking through his 4-year leukemia journey, like such an incredible man, and just loved his job and loved being a pastor and loved serving the local church and hated that the leukemia was taking him away. And so he was still speaking and serving during that time. And there would be Saturday nights where Andrew would get a phone call and his dad was being rushed to the hospital, and then Andrew would have to come up with a message for Sunday, like on the spot right then. And so it was a really difficult 4-year journey. You know, any cancer journey is just so unpredictable, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't really know what the timeline's going to look like. And so we lived in limbo for those 4 years, and it was really difficult. But Andrew stepped up to the plate in so many ways. Like, he really led the church through that season with his dad, and it was really beautiful to watch. And the church really admired and had so much respect for Andrew during that time. So it was such an easy transition for his dad to pass the church over to him because they already loved him and respected him so much.
So from the description of Andrew, he was a multi-talented person and also very committed, very gifted, and loved. And he took over this big church at what age, about 27 or so? When he was became official pastor?
Yes.
So with this tremendous responsibility also as dad to your 3 boys, and yet he was thriving in it seemed, wasn't he?
He was. You know, he loved, just like his dad, he loved the local church. He never wanted to be a celebrity pastor. He never wanted to travel and speak. Like, his heart and his passion was for the local church. And so he really took his job seriously, and he was committed, and he loved it, and he thrived, and he was gifted, like on the stage and off the stage, an excellent, gifted communicator, and just so good at what he did, and so called and so equipped.
And then you write, mental illness came rushing into our world. The way you write it, Kayla, it seems like it happened very suddenly.
It did. You know, in October of 2017, our family had a stalker issue, and I really think that was the biggest invitation for fear for my husband. And he started having these panic attacks, and they were so debilitating. Oftentimes, they would happen at night when he was trying to fall asleep. And if you've ever had a panic attack or witnessed a panic attack, you know that it's like this full body experience. It would take over his entire body from the top of his head to the bottoms of his feet, and he would be gone. I would look in his eyes, and his eyes would be glazed over, and it wasn't him. And so 4 to 5 times a week, so debilitating, very terrifying, very emotional for him. So we were trying to figure out why those were happening, and we were working with doctors and specialists and doing tests, and we were trying to get to the bottom of it. And he still wrestled from about October until April of 2018. He wrestled with these very debilitating panic attacks weekly. In the book, I described there was one Sunday. It was Easter weekend, so there were like 8 services he was going to have to preach, and it was right before the very first service that a security guard found him on the bathroom floor in the middle of a panic attack. And I rushed over to the office, and I tried to, help him through it the best I could. And amazingly, he was able to push through it, and then 5 minutes later, he's on the stage speaking the very first Easter service, and I'm back in the green room crying. And so he was pushing through the panic attacks. He was pushing through the pain, just like his dad. Like, he felt so called to the job, and he didn't want anything to pull him away. He loved ministry. He loved what he was doing, and he hated that this was happening to him. The next week after that Easter Sunday, he had another massive panic attack that landed him in the hospital, and we just decided, enough is enough. All the results, all the test results are coming back inconclusive. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening in his body. He needs to take a break. He needs to rest. Maybe he just never took a break after his dad passed away. Maybe he needs to grieve. We need to do something about this. So we put him on a sabbatical and started that journey with depression. Just a few weeks later, we were sitting in a psychiatrist's office, and he was diagnosed with depression. And he was really relieved to have a diagnosis. He was very relieved to finally know what was going on inside of his body and what was causing the panic attack.
So there you are, being a supportive wife, and we're coming up on a break, so I won't even ask you about this. I'll just kind of fill in a little bit, knowing that he really had your support. And not only were you supporting him, you're raising 3 little boys. And I thought it was interesting to see that you'd been a psych major in college. But I think, no matter how much we know about something, we have a lot to learn when we actually go through it. And it just sounds like Kayla, ladies and gentlemen, Kayla and Andrew really went through this together. And, you know, their love, in a sense, carried them down to the bottom and, you know, sometimes back up, but never all the way up. And that's the sad story that Kayla tells in her book, Fear Gone Wild. I do want to recommend it because not only is it just a compelling, true story, Kayla sprinkles ministry throughout. And even at the end, there's an appendix that I think could really be used as, you know, several weeks of a Bible study, especially for people that are dealing with mental illness in somebody that they love or in themselves. So, you know, you might want to pick up the book and stick with us because we're going to hear more of Kayla's story right after these messages. We'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Kayla Stoecklein is my guest. She's the author of Fear Gone Wild, just released yesterday. The story of her husband's mental illness, megachurch pastor in California. I mentioned, Kayla, that you had 3 little boys and you felt like a single parent, which I'm sure was not easy. And I think, you know, what I think about is how isolated you must feel because your husband's the pastor. So you can't exactly lean on a lot of people in the church when your husband's the pastor, can you?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I wanted to protect him, and for a lot of my friends, he was their pastor. And so I didn't want them to look down on him. I didn't want them to lose respect for him. So it was really hard for me to know who to confide in. And I didn't do a very good job of letting people in and reaching out and being honest about what life was like at home. So it was isolating and it was lonely. My husband was isolated and lonely in his own mental health journey, and I was isolated and lonely in my own journey as being caretaker and mother of my 3 young boys.
Yeah. So just kind of take us down the road a little bit and tell us about how it went when he went back to church.
Yeah, so that summer, he was doing everything he knew to do to get better. We really were doing everything. He was seeing the psychiatrist every other week. He was taking medication. We were seeing a therapist together for 2 hours every week. He went and spent time with mentors. He went on solo trips to sit in solitude. We did a 2-week road trip, just the 2 of us. Like, we were tackling that season head on. We really wanted him to get well. And the doctors actually thought he was getting better, and so they released him back to work at the end of July. So he hit the ground running on August 1st, 2018, and gave 2 powerful messages on mental illness. And at the time, the church really wasn't talking about it that often. And so what he was doing was bold. It was a bold, vulnerable, brave move for him to tackle that and talk about it. And he shared his own experience. He shared what it was like for him wrestling with depression and anxiety, panic attacks. He gave out statistics from the NAMI website. He gave out statistics of suicide. He gave out the suicide hotline number. Like, he really knew all the facts. He would have known where to go for help. And then headed into the 3rd week, he just had a really awful day in the office. He wasn't 100% well. He told our family and told the staff that he was at about 65% when he returned to work. And so he wanted to ease back into ministry. He wanted to grow in his health as he was easing back in. And so his mind wasn't well. His mind was still sick. And so we really realized that day, okay, we need to step back. Maybe he wasn't ready to go back to work. And so while we were away from him for just a little bit, making phone calls, scheduling a guest speaker for Sunday, trying to take the next steps for his health, he attempted suicide. And we were completely shocked, completely stunned. The team of doctors that was surrounding him was completely shocked and completely stunned. Like, we really, truly never saw this coming. And so he was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors ran a bunch of tests, and there was nothing that they could do. And so on August 25th, 2018, he passed away and went to be with Jesus, and I was handed this brand new life as a widow and now single parent of 3 young boys. They were 2, 4, and 5 at the time of his death.
That was 2 years ago, right?
2 years ago, yeah.
Well, Kayla, you are so helpful, I think, for people that have to deal with suicide in their life. So can I take you back and ask you, how did you react when Andrew first mentioned suicide to you?
Yeah, I'll never forget it. We had put the boys to bed, and we were sitting out in the kitchen at the kitchen island, and I was just venting my own frustrations from the season and being with the boys all day. And, he was venting his frustrations, and he shared with me that he was up in the middle of the night before. He had his staff organization charts spread all over the counter, and that he was so overwhelmed and that he thought about killing himself. And my immediate reaction to his admission was, that is the most selfish thing you could ever do. You would never do that to me and the boys. How dare you say that? Like, I was so shocked, and I felt like it was so selfish of him to say that. I'm like, how could you? I'm here, like, telling you that I'm struggling with the kids. Like, how could you say that to me? Like, how dare you? And now what I've realized is that that was not the right response. And he told me in that moment, he's like, Kayla, that is not what you say to somebody that tells you that they're struggling with thoughts of suicide. You need to think about what you said and do some research and come up with something better to say. And
he said that to
right.
you?
He said that to me, and he was completely right. Like, when someone tells us those things, like, that is a time to lean in. That's a time to ask questions. That's a time to respond with a heart of love and empathy and compassion and understanding. Like, it's not a time to react out of our own emotions. It's a time to respond and to lean in and to listen and to try to, for a minute, figure out what life is like from their point of view, and for a minute share in their pain and offer hope, and maybe even offer solutions that they hadn't thought about before. You know, questions that we ask are so powerful. Questions like, do you have a suicide plan? What problem are you trying to solve through suicide? I wish I would have asked him questions instead of reacting out of my emotions.
Oh, well, I mean, it's hard to know what to do when you've never confronted something before. You did say in the book that this was a decision that Andrew made, but you would like to rather say, and it does feel like this, that it was almost inevitable because he was struggling so much. You'd rather say it was a tragic accident.
Yeah, you know, I don't see his death as a decision. What I learned later on from his psychiatrist is that 90% of suicides are impulsive. And so it's literally a moment of pure, intense pain. You know, unless you've experienced it yourself, we really don't understand. It's this moment of intense pain. Psychologists describe it as this psych ache, like this overwhelming pain in your mind and your brain. And it seems like the only way to make the pain go away is to die. Like death seems like the only solution. And so he wasn't able to make a rational decision in that moment. He wasn't able to think rationally. He wasn't able to access that part of his brain. And so it's been so helpful for me to see it that way and to understand it that way, and that the suicide really, truly is not anybody's fault. It's not Andrew's fault. It's not my fault. It's not the doctor's fault. It's not the medication's fault. Like, it really, truly isn't anybody's fault. It's a tragic accident. It should not have happened, but nobody is to blame. And that's really helped me in my healing. I think it's helped me in leading my boys through their healing as well, just to have empathy and compassion for their dad and his illness instead of seeing it as a selfish decision that he made.
Kayla, I think it's amazing that it's been 2 years and you've put together, I think this book is really a masterpiece in the sense that throughout the book, which is compelling just to read your story, and it's just, it's hard to imagine someone going through this at such a young age, especially with all the responsibility that you have and had. But you've taken it to another level, because throughout the book, it also helps people understand mental illness and suicide. And I think it's just a real ministry book, especially for people that are dealing with these problems that sometimes seem intractable. So I just want to thank you for writing it. And I also want to say that I can tell from reading and talking to you that God has wonderful plans for you. And that he's got a ministry for you. And we will be watching and waiting to see what he does in your life. And so thank you so much for taking this first step and writing this book and for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kayla Stoecklein, her book, Fear Gone Wild. I suggest you read it. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for everybody that pulled together to do the show today. God bless you.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.